Come on, that's so good. Come on, Jesus. Yes, so good. Let's just give Jesus a shout of praise, right? Come on, Jesus! Woo! Yes, Jesus! Come on. So good, so good. All right, one more time. Jesus! Jesus! Woo! Because of you, we're family. Come on. Yes, so good, so good. Woo! So good, Jesus. So good. Yeah. Come on. That was so good. Get to just get rocked by him. Yeah, so good. Romans 8:19 says, the entire universe is standing on tiptoe, yearning to see the unveiling of God's glorious sons and daughters. Come on. The entire universe is standing on tiptoe, yearning to see the unveiling of God's glorious sons and daughters. We just heard about God's sons and daughters, didn't we? And the universe is standing on tiptoe for us to stand in our identity. Come on. As we're standing in our identity, as we get our wounds sealed up, the universe is standing on tiptoe, because when we are standing in the full light of how God made us, it's a glorious thing. The heaven and earth is shaken when we stand in the confidence as the sons and daughters of our awesome Father. I just loved how he said that the Father's love was placed on a bloody display. Yeah, come on. He is the God of passion. He is the God of passion. And we are no less. The words of passion say the entire universe is standing on tiptoe. That's not just to bring an emotional response, but that's the kind of God that we serve. It's the kind of world that we live in. We are talking about drastic, amazing things that happen. We're not talking about your Sunday school fairy tale type level. We're talking about earth-shaking, movie-making, amazing God who shook the cosmos with us. And when we stand in our inheritance as the sons and daughters, the world is going to quake as we stand in that authority. So good. One of the things we're going to talk about tonight is jurisdiction of the kingdom, and that I am friends with Jesus, and better than friends, but I'm actually his son. And for some of us, we're also his daughters. It's a half and half split. So I'm going to read to us from Judges. In Judges 6, it's the story of Gideon, and he says, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza, and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep nor cattle nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. That's kind of incredible. It's quite the picture. It was impossible to count them or their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. It sounds like pretty drastic and stark introduction, right? They basically have this picture of this swarm of army coming in, completely obliterating everything in its path, and taking, and let's just put the word picture out there. So the Israelites are standing in the promised land. And when we're reading this in Judges, Israel is standing on the very ground that was promised to them from God, that they suffered for 40 years because of their ignorance and because of their disobedience. And not only then that they finally got into the promised land, and then they've spent generations fighting for this land, generations trying to gain their spot and saying, God promised me this land, it's now time for you to get out. Land that they fought for, that their fathers fought for with blood, sweat, and tears. And now, because of Israelites' disobedience and because of their rebellion against God, the neighboring nations came in and totally began to undo everything that their fathers' generations had paid for. Imagine if you had a family that owned this amazing plot of land, and as far as you can remember, your family's generations stewarded that land and kept it nice, kept it looking beautiful, trimmed the trees, took care of the fruits and the vegetables and the things of that land. And then all of a sudden, maybe your next generation, 2 ones down, doesn't care about the amount of effort that was put into keeping that land the way it was. And then a neighbor comes over and just turns it and lights it on fire. And if you were to see what that was, imagine the heartbreak that you would be experiencing. And that's just to give you a picture of what was taking place. The land that the Israelites had been inherited from God and been conquered with God and with their forefathers was completely annihilated and destroyed by this alien nation. And so then the best part of the story is when God comes in the mix. So after the whole entire land is burnt to the ground, is ravished completely, and with nothing left but just sticks and stones, God comes in. He says, when the Israelites cried out to the Lord, he sent them a prophet who said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt and out of the land of slavery. I rescued you from the hand of the Egyptians, and I delivered you from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them out before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live, but you have not listened to me." So God comes in the picture. He says, remember what I did for you. Remember the sacrifice that it cost to see the land that you're actually living in and to see the promises that you're walking out. He comes in, he reminds me, he says, this land that you're standing on was purchased with a price, but you didn't honor the price that was paid for, and you didn't take care of the land. And now it's gone back. But God says, I am the God who says, I'm your Redeemer. The Israelites used to have a word for God that said, you're Jehovah, my Redeemer. And that's the amazing part of who God is that there's always a second chance, and he's always the God of the Redeemer. And he comes in these moments when all hope is lost, when there's no more cliffhanger to be had at the end of the movie, and he says, now it's time for me to come in and change something. Now it's time for God to show up and do what only God can do and say, I'm going to redeem the land that your forefathers' blood, sweat, and tears went into, because their sacrifice in obedience to me is not going to go unmet. Because the enemy can deal any card he wants to in our life. But when our forefathers and when previous generations have sacrificed their life and have sacrificed their blood, sweat, and tears for a promise that God has instilled on their generational line, God does not let that go unmet. And the enemy might come and try and bring it down to literally ground zero. But God says no, because of their faithfulness, because of my faithfulness to your generation, because of my love to your fathers, I'm going to come in and I'm going to restore what's broken, even if it was your fault. And the Israelites made the conscious choice to say, God, we need to turn back to you because you are our first love. And God, would you please be merciful again? Would you please come and redeem again what we did not steward? And the amazing part is that God answered. The angel of the Lord came and sat under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Josiah, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. So God says, big announcement, guys. I'm going to come in. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. Now you need to trust me. And then he goes to meet with Gideon and doesn't bring an audience with him, but he goes to him personally and says, the Lord is with you, mighty warrior. He finds the one that was stewarding well. He was in the wine presses. He was tending the vineyard, right? And he says, I am going to use you. He says, I am with you, mighty warrior. And he calls to Gideon's identity, and he says, this is who you are. You are a mighty warrior, because he sees the heart, he sees the characteristic traits that he put in him, just as we heard. Before the beginning of the cosmos, he bore those traits into Gideon. He said, you are going to be my chosen one to redeem Israel. And Gideon at the time was completely terrified and afraid, sitting in a winepress, completely afraid of the people who were going to come that were attacking his father's land and were going to maybe kill him next. And God says, in the midst of all the craziness and all this stuff that looks like it can't go any worse, I'm going to give a redeemer, and I'm going to say that you are the mighty warrior. Now, why is this relevant to us? Jesus died on the cross, and he not only gave us salvation and restoration and relationship with him, but he broke the curse of death. He broke the enemy's power and authority over this entire earth, this ball in space that we call earth, that God so carefully formed and crafted, and says that he loves so much that I would send my son to die for everybody. That's the God we serve. And he said, I am going to break the curse that was on this earth. I'm going to break the curse that was on this land. And the earth has now become our promised land. And just like this, God says, I am coming and I'm going to break the curse. And when Jesus died on the cross, that's what happened. All of creation is redeemed. But how many of us know that since that day when the curse was broken, that things have not gone completely kosher or amazing since then, right? Some things have gone really well. Some people in time in history have stewarded the promised land really well, and some haven't. And some people are currently stewarding the promised land really well, and some aren't. And the promised land has now become not just a place of ground that is in the Middle East, but has now become the entire world that we stand in. And what we stand in now is the price that Jesus paid. And where we stand today at 2019 is Jesus says to us, some of your fathers might not have stewarded the land well. You might not be stewarding the land well. It might feel like some places in life are at ground zero. But I'm coming in as your Savior, and I'm going to switch, and now the God card comes in. Because when nothing else is left, God says, I'm coming in. And that's what we've been seeing happen all across this earth, is for the past 100 years, you've been seeing just such a move of God on this earth like you've never been seen before. Because God said, I'm coming back, and because of the price that my son paid on the cross, this is not going to go unmet. Nothing the enemy has tried to do or tried to attack is ever going to succeed, because the promise that I've placed and my will is going to happen regardless, come hell or high water. And that's the God who's here now, and he says, I am redeeming, I'm reconciling. And now we stand here today at 2019, and we say, God, we want to be the sons and the daughters that steward the promised land. Yeah. So what does that look like for us? The kingdom of heaven is what Jesus taught when he was here. He taught the kingdom of heaven is at hand, it's here. So how many of us know that God is always... He's never not been God. He's always been completely in charge of everything that's around here in this earth, right? He is always God. But his kingdom, his presence is what he said, your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. So even Jesus in his prayer was saying that there is a difference between God's manifest presence, obviously containing the earth and keeping everything together because God is God, but there is something that needs to happen in the transition of saying there is heaven and the kingdom of heaven now coming to earth. And Bill Johnson said this really well the other day. He said that the whole entire earth is God's dominion, the whole entire universe is God's dominion. But it's the kingdom and its jurisdiction that needs to be displaced across the earth. And that's what I mean when I say the jurisdiction of the kingdom. And one of the things that is extremely paramount for all of us is we understand that just like if we have any town that we live in, there's certain rules or certain guidelines, even in the country we live in, the United States of America. There's certain constitutional laws or certain state laws and country precepts that have to be abided by. But how many of us know that those rules don't get followed? A lot of times those rules aren't followed. So because let's think about this, right? If people in Congress, our senators and our congressmen and women, they stand in the Capitol and they make laws. But how many of us know that when the person makes the law in Congress, nobody goes out the next day and does the law, right? The law is made, but really there's no change to anything in our daily lives. So how does this process happen between when a law is made and then you and me see a change in our daily life? How does that process happen? The way that process happens, there's a second step, and it's called enforcement. The government and our congressmen and women, they make the laws. Then we have the people who enforce the laws, and then that's how we see a change in our daily life. So let's take the example. God has very clearly set his kingdom over this earth. His laws are the laws of the universe and over everything that was here. He has redeemed everything that we see in our daily life. But some of us don't see it practically happening in our daily life. So what's pieces missing? Enforcement. And that is the key of jurisdiction. And that is the call that God is calling us today, is just like Gideon, he says, I'm calling you to be my enforcer. Because if we want to see the daily life change, if we want to see this earth transformed to the kingdom of our God, we need to stop moving from preaching the laws to actually enforcing. Because telling people what the laws are doesn't change anything. A policeman can come around and tell you what the law is, but it's not until they enforce the law that we recognize the consequences of the law. And how many times has the idea of enforcement looked like beating people over the head with, you're sinning, you're doing something wrong, you're wrong, you're shamed, you're guilt, right? That's what enforcement's looked like up until this day. But how many of us have seen that worked out? Our daily lives are not better because of that kind of enforcement. That's not how God meant for it to be. What did God say when he said enforce the precepts in the kingdom of heaven? You know what he said? He said, go into the all world and preach the gospel. What's the gospel? That Jesus came and died, and he says, I love every single one of my children, and I don't want any of them to be without me. And that's the enforcement that we're called to live out. And what else does he say? He says, go out into the all world, preach the gospel to all nations, healing the sick, raising the dead, cleansing the lepers, right? Those are not passive, those are active verbs. Those are actually us doing something. And the key to the kingdom of heaven is what Jesus has taught us, is that there is an enforcing and a very intentional and a very active enforcing that needs to take place. And how do we actually do that? We do that by actually acting out the precepts and the laws of the kingdom of heaven. So what are the laws of the kingdom of heaven? The kingdom of heaven says there's wealth in place of poverty. It says there's healing instead of sickness. There's freedom in place of bondage. There's joy over mourning. There's life over death. There's authority. There's favor. There's justice over injustice. There is love over fear. There's victory over defeat. There is identity over shame. And there's peace over chaos. So, how many of us want to go out and enforce those laws of the land? Come on. That is what we've been called to do, is to enforce those laws on the land. And when the Lord was showing me this, I was instantly gripped with the understanding that if I'm going to see the kingdom of heaven come to this earth, I need to be active in enforcing the laws of the kingdom. And so when I see sickness, I'm going to become the police officer of healing. And I'm going to go and enforce the jurisdiction that Jesus paid for. And I'm going to start bringing healing to that sickness. When I see somebody that's not walking in strength and in shame, I'm going to start enforcing the truth of the kingdom, which says you have identity and you have love. And I'm going to become the police officer of love. And I'm going to come and I'm going to address that. And I'm not going to let something like that stand when the price has been paid for that to be there. That I'm going to enforce the jurisdiction of Jesus' payment on the cross. I'm going to enforce the jurisdiction of Jesus over this land, knowing that I do not have to see sickness. I do not have to see shame. I do not have to see poverty in the way that we understand poverty. I do not have to see things that are not of the kingdom. Anytime I see something that is not of the kingdom, it's not coming into agreement with the jurisdiction of heaven. And then that's when I get to step in and say, no, I'm here to make a difference. If something in this earth is not conforming to the jurisdiction of the kingdom, then guess what? I have been chosen as the enforcer to say, no, I'm going to bring that place into alignment with the kingdom of heaven. And that looks like love. Because Jesus did not come with a sword to beat people. He did not come to whip people into action, but he came with the sacrifice of love, and he said, this is the way I'm enforcing my kingdom. And that's the way we enforce the kingdom of heaven wherever we go. When we walk into our workplace, when we walk into the grocery store, when we walk into any place that is inhabited with a person, we bring the love of Jesus. And it's that love of Jesus that enforces the jurisdiction of heaven and changes the world that we live in. Yep. And if we want to see the church, this church, if we want to see the world change, if we want to see our practical lives change, then we need to be taking active roles in enforcing the jurisdiction of heaven, which means bringing love, which means bringing life when people want to speak death. And it means not apologizing for the laws of the kingdom of heaven. Because how many of us know that the biggest hindrance to acting out the jurisdiction of anything is basically conformity and spinelessness and laziness and not valuing what was paid for. When I work at work, it's a very practical example for me. There are rules and regulations that my company sets for how things need to be done. But what I've realized is that those rules can be in a rule book and can have the most serious consequences. But I have a choice to enforce them with my employees. And there's two things that can happen. I can apologize for those standards and not enforce them, and then see things get out of hand. And then when I try to figure out why things are not going the way they are, the problem is not that the company didn't have the laws. The problem isn't that my supervisors aren't enforcing it. The problem is that I broke the chain and I'm not enforcing those laws with my associates. Yeah. Because if there are things that have been written, I am the doorkeeper to seeing that happen. And that's the best thing, is that God has chosen. He says, no, I made disciples. And I am saying that you guys are now the next door. You guys are the last stop. The buck stops with you guys as we go into the kingdom. And so we are the last doorkeeper of enforcing the laws of heaven. So we can be passive and let things happen. We can be passive and see the jurisdiction of the kingdom not enforced. Or we can say, no, I'm going to take a stand, and no, this is the law of the kingdom of heaven. I'm going to take a stand on this. And I'm going to bring love when somebody else wants to speak death. I'm going to bring joy when somebody wants to speak hopelessness. I'm going to bring healing when somebody else wants to speak sickness. And now the biggest part is not apologizing for it. Right. And that is the hardest part that I'm finding in this journey, is apologizing for the kingdom of heaven. And how many times do I find myself trying to downplay or apologize for the jurisdiction of the kingdom of heaven when it's actually been the God-backed law of the universe that I get to stand behind? That I get to stand with the full faith and power and backed, like our dollars say that they're backed by the full faith and government of the United States of America. Well, the best part is that I have news for us, that our power and our jurisdiction is backed by the full faith of heaven and God's and Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. And I can't think of anything else that has more power than that. So the question that I've been wrestling with is, God, why am I not acting out the enforcement of your kingdom of heaven? Why am I not acting in the full faith of this? And what's missing is the faith to believe that what God has done is actually going to happen. Because the lies say, no, there's no authority for any of this. There's no authority for that. You can't do this. That's not going to happen when you say it. That's not going to happen when you say it. You're not going to tell that mountain to move. It's going to move. And the issue is what I choose to believe. And I have to choose to believe that, God, you died on the cross. Your power is stronger than any power in this universe. You have now set the laws and standards of this world that I live in. And now, God, I want to enforce it. And because I need to see my daily life changed. I'm sick and tired of seeing myself live in a second-rate earth because of a Jesus who paid for a first-rate heaven. I am not going to stand here and get a second-rate inheritance when I have the authority to enforce the first-rate and best inheritance that's been set before me. So why do we read in Romans? We read that the entire universe is standing on tiptoe for the glorious sons and daughters of God to be revealed. So what does that mean? The creation is waiting for us to start enforcing the laws of the kingdom of heaven. Yeah. Because the jurisdiction of the kingdom of heaven is bringing a first-rate encounter and is bringing literally heaven to earth. And creation is waiting to get what it has been paid for, because Christ has paid for this. And now it wants its inheritance. And the earth wants to have what God has paid for. And I don't want to be the person who keeps on stopping it from happening. You showed that you are my intimate friends when you obey all that I command you. I have never called you servants because a master doesn't confide in his servants. And servants don't always understand what the master is doing, but I call you my most intimate friends, for I reveal to you everything that I've heard from my Father. That's who we are. We're not servants. We're not just citizens and public officers who go around enforcing this. The only people who are qualified to do this are the friends and the sons and daughters of God. And it's not a rule that I'm applying from a book. It's the decree of the King of the universe, who is also my Father. So I can stand in full faith with my Father. And I am going to be completely honest that I have no idea how it's supposed to look, and that I don't know, because I'm still working this out, and I'm still being bold. And I'm still trying to be strong and courageous. What's interesting is when we read in Joshua the Lord came to Joshua, and in the first chapter of Joshua, it says, he said verbally to Joshua 3 times, be strong and courageous. And why is that significant? When God says something 3 times, he means it is really what I mean, and it's really going to happen. And he said to Joshua, be strong and courageous 3 times. And why is that? Because I need to be strong and being courageous in order to enforce the kingdom of heaven. Because it is going to cost me my pride. It's going to cost me my standing with some people sometimes. And it's gonna hurt me in a lot of places because it's gonna make me feel awkward sometimes. But I am slowly and surely, and I would like to say now prophetically, I'm quickly approaching the day when it's going to be very easy to break those down. Because I am getting wrecked for what the kingdom of heaven looks like on this earth. And the more that I encounter it, the more I get hungry to see it happen. And the more that I'm losing the taste for my pride, the more I'm losing my taste for the comfort of being in the status quo. Because I'm realizing that the first-rate heaven that God has paid for is an amazing thing that I would not trade what I currently have for. And so I encourage all of us to get immense in our relationship with the passion of Jesus, because the more that I experience the relationship that he paid for, the more that I experience the cost of the relationship that he paid for me, then I'm not going to want to settle for anything second less. And it's going to be my joy to bring the love of the kingdom of heaven to everywhere I go. So I bless you guys with that. Have an amazing, amazing night, and we'll see you next time.